Welcome to Raging Bullets, a DC Comics fan podcast, episode 338. Welcome to Raging Bullets. I'm Sean Whalen, Dr. Norge, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Jim, the sensei of the Whatnot Segulin, and the Duke of You Know. On this episode, we are joined by longtime friend of the show, Freddie E. Williams II, as we talk about his work on Captain Atom number 0, Green Arrow number 0 and 16, also the end of his exclusive agreement with DC and what that means for the future for Freddie, and also some of the behind-the-scenes that goes into being an artist. And there's a lot of great stories that Freddie shares with us on what that experience is like, and I really enjoy the way he opens up and brings us into that world, because it's something, I'm not an artist myself, I'm a fan of this material, and I love getting those stories, so I hope you enjoy this episode as much as we did recording it. We are proud members of the Comics Podcast Network and the League of Comic Book Podcasts. Sponsoring us this episode is DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. Over at DCBService.com, I want to shout out, they're doing that all-new DC Trades and Hardcovers deal again at 50% off, so any of the collected editions that you're thinking of pre-ordering, you want to go grab them over at DCBService.com right now. They also have books like Constantine number 1. It's 50% off. It's the brand new ongoing series. I love Constantine, and I'm really excited for this series because I know they ended the Hellblazer series at Vertigo in order to make room for this series, and I've been enjoying his appearances in Justice League Dark, so I'm really excited to see where this series is going to go. I want to remind everyone they are a Comixology digital partner, and what that means is anytime you do any of your digital purchasing, you earn 5% of those purchases towards credit towards DCB Service shopping. So it doesn't cost you any more to do that, but it's a great way to help out our show sponsor and to earn yourself some credit, which is really cool. Also sponsoring us this episode is InStockTrades.com, and I want to shout out, they have the Captain Atom Trade Paperback Volume 1 Evolution. It's the new 52 version. This is the one that Freddie E. Williams II did the art on with writer J.T. Krull. It collects issues 1 through 6. It's 45% off. It's $14.99 regularly, only $8.24. This is a great time to get that. 6 issues of the comic for only $8.24. It's a great time to pick up that deal from InStockTrades.com. Remember, orders of $50 or more do give you free shipping as well, so if you're looking for a lot of collected editions or trades, this is the time to bundle up on them and grab them at an amazing deal. I want to thank both those sites for sponsoring our show. Oh, James, what kind of a podcast are we?
Raging Bullets is a spoiler podcast. We go in-depth into plotline, story twists, and whatnot of the comics we're discussing on the show. So, if you haven't read the books, you may want to come back later so you can better enjoy the show.
Let's talk to Freddie E. Williams II.
Hole in a donut.
Joining us once again is longtime friend of the show. Friend of the show. You're a friend of the show. Joining us once again is longtime friend of the show. Well. Yeah, well, I'm leaving it. It's because it's like, why take that at that point? Because it's kind of silly. Joining us is longtime friend of the show, Freddie E. Williams II. And Freddie, it's wonderful to have you back on Raging Bullets.
Thanks. I'm glad to be on, and I did not realize it had been so long, and it's been too long, so thanks for having me back on.
And one of the issues that we haven't done that I want to talk about for sure, we've been going through and doing all the Zero issues. We haven't talked Captain Atom number 0, and I'd really like to talk to you about our experiences on that. Before we jump into that, though, one of the things that I remember years ago when we first started talking to you, I remember when you signed your exclusive agreement with DC, and that was a big thing at that time, because you were seeing announcements all the time as fans. You go to DC's website and you go to Marvel's website, and that was like a big buzz, exclusive agreements. And that's something I've noticed as a fan in recent years. You don't see that anymore. You don't see that being the big buzz. I know that through conversations with you, you're no longer exclusive to DC. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And I can imagine as an artist, there's some excitement over opportunities to do some things maybe that you haven't been able to do during your exclusive.
Yeah, let's see. Back in 2005, at the very end of 2005 is when I did my first work with DC. And at the time I was working full-time at Hallmark as my day job, Hallmark Cards, doing design work and stuff. And Hallmark was a great job. I was nervous about leaving it. And it was entirely possible that if I had basically quit Hallmark at the earliest sign of work from DC, DC could have stopped giving me work in a short period of time. It's only through retrospect that I know that I've been working for them since 2005, but I didn't know. In other words, I had no guarantee of longevity at DC. And so I stuck at Hallmark and was doing monthly stuff at DC for a full year. And I wasn't really sure what my exit strategy was going to be from Hallmark. Like I said, it was the best 9-to-5 job I'd ever had, and I was afraid to give that up. When DC offered me my exclusive, which took effect in October of 2006, almost exactly a year from when they gave me my first work there on Seven Soldiers, Mr. Miracle, that was the deciding factor. I felt like I had, well, it was clear in the details of my exclusive that I had a certain amount of work that was going to be guaranteed to me. It was a 2-year-long exclusive contract for working for DC, so I was thinking at least the next 2 years are going to be as good as I can make them. They renewed me 2 more times, if that makes sense. So for 6 years, I was under exclusive with them. And the benefit of that is the security, knowing that you have a steady amount of work that's coming to you, that's guaranteed to you. And there's some other benefits, like they help you with health benefits and all this stuff. And anyone who has searched for their own health care, as boring of a topic as this is, but you'll know that it's really expensive to try to pay for it yourself. So that's a benefit, and there's some other stuff. The disadvantage of working under an exclusive is that you're kind of subject to whatever assignments they give to you. And I was fortunate that I actually liked or found something to like about every assignment that I worked on with DC. But there's also the disadvantage of, there's a lot of properties, intellectual properties, that DC does not own the rights to. It wasn't until recently that I even knew that they did Masters of the Universe, or else I would have probably lobbied for that a long time ago. But, stuff like that we all grew up on, like He-Man, Ninja Turtles, G.I. Joe, Transformers, a long list of other stuff that, and of course Marvel as well. But I'm saying there's stuff that anything that's outside of DC is off limits. I even took it in the spirit of the contract that I was approached a couple times by Upper Deck to do some trading cards that would feature non-DC characters, and I walked away from that just because, even though it wasn't comic books exactly, it was just a little too gray. So in October of 2012, my final exclusive expired, which was, as you mentioned, it was both exciting to work outside of DC and also really scary. I knew that my run on Green Arrow would be coming to an end to make way for Jeff Lemire, him taking over and stuff. So, and I wasn't sure what would be happening after that. So that's the phase that I'm in now, is that exhilarating and scary area where I'm adjusting to not having that exclusive.
When you were talking about healthcare and for things like that, I do think that's a very interesting topic, because I'm sure a lot of our listeners, we get people all the time who are, want to break into comics and just wondering what are the considerations. And I think people don't realize that with any job, these are considerations that you need to, with the security that comes along with things like exclusive agreements, things that you have to take into consideration now, that it seems like they're not doing those things. Because like I mentioned at the beginning, I remember the announcements when there was a big, huge announcement that we were getting that people were going on exclusives. And that's a trend that I've noticed in maybe the last 3 years seems to have waned. Where you don't see those being the big buzz anymore. And as a fan, I always liked the exclusive thing. And the reason why is you start associating people with a company. You start associating their work with a company. And I've always been a fan of like the Marvel versus DC thing and, all that. So when you've got people that are on exclusive, it's like, he's a DC guy, and you rally behind that, as goofy as that might sound. But, as a kid, I grew up with the whole idea of the Marvel bullpen and DC's bullpen. And it's kind of the illusion that's crafted, I think, for the audience. Yeah. And there's something about that with the exclusives. That was something that it was bringing back that vibe for me again. That was something that I thought was neat. The work that we first started talking to you about was Robin. Comic Geek Speak, we were on one of their episodes talking about the year at DC, and one of the books that really stood out for us was Robin because of Adam Beechen's writing and your artwork on there. And really that book just made me a huge fan of your work. And it's stayed that way ever since. Every project that you've done, I really like that you change your art style to kind of think about the tone and the direction of the book. And I've become a big fan of your creative sensibilities. It's something that, through that whole exclusive I've been enjoying and beyond now. I'm excited as a fan for the opportunity to see you on different projects, things that like I haven't thought of, like, wow, Freddie can do this now. And that's the kind of thing that like is going to be a lot of fun for me as a reader to see like what you're going to do next and what that's going to look like.
Well, thanks. Yeah, and I'm like, whenever you said that there's been a lot less of those announcements, yeah, there seem to be, just in general, there's a lot fewer exclusives going on. I think that's a conscious and purpose-driven effort made by both Marvel and DC to move away from exclusives being the primary way that they hold on to their talent. And part of it is it makes much more economic sense for them to not rely upon that so much, because having a big stable of artists under exclusive is more expensive, and it also limits bringing fresh blood into the industry. So I'm now speaking objectively, like not how it affects my life, but I think it's beneficial to have more open borders, so to speak, where you're allowing more of an integration of artists, newer artists, and also maybe you nab a DC guy for your Marvel book for a couple of issues or for an arc or whatever it is, and then that artist then goes to another company like Dark Horse or whatever. The DC versus Marvel, or the kind of, there's a little bit of that where you're kind of rooting for your team or something. But I've always been more of a fan, although there's certain characters that I always gravitate towards. I'm more of a fan of, in addition to that, I'm a fan of certain creative teams or certain artists. So no matter what they were drawing, I would find that obscure, even if it was some company I'd never heard of before. You know, I'll go find that just because they drew it. So anyway, it kind of goes, it goes back and forth, or it's all a part of the enjoyment of comics for me.
You know, before we started chatting on here, you mentioned Paul Smith, and I was thinking about when I switched from a character-driven reader to a creator-driven reader, and it was during X-Men. It was Uncanny X-Men as a kid. I remember picking that up, and I started to, I don't know why I didn't notice it previously, but I started to notice the writer, and I think I was at an age just where you start to look at things maybe that you didn't look at before on how this book was actually crafted. And, you know, Chris Claremont, John Byrne, Dave Cockrum, Paul Smith, you know, these are creators that I started to get to know through that title. And I became a fan of their storytelling sensibilities and the way that they delivered artwork. And noticing that, like, when it shifted from one of them to another one, that I was enjoying the art just as much, but it was a different experience because it was a different creator that was doing that. So then I would follow them onto new projects. And I've become very much. I'm still a character guy. I love my characters too, but I'm like a hybrid. I love creators too. So I end up following my favorite creators to all their new projects. And the cool thing about that relationship and being a fan of both is that I still get to enjoy all my favorite characters, but then I'm also finding that because I follow my favorite creators, I'm exposed to all kinds of different stories and all kinds of different opportunities to experience comics in a way that I haven't before, which is always fun because comics, I'm convinced, are like this just wide open, infinite landscape of storytelling possibilities, and it really is due to the creators that have introduced me to that. And it's why I encourage everybody to please make sure to latch on to your favorite creators and follow them to new projects, because you'll get exposed to all kinds of very crazy, cool new things.
Yeah, like some of the creators, you might be surprised by some of the other stuff that they get into. Like with Arthur Adams, I've always been a big Arthur Adams fan, and he's more of a Marvel guy than a DC guy. He did a little DC work, not a whole lot, and then he also has his own creator-owned Dark Horse stuff. But he also did like the creature from the Black Lagoon. He did that. He did a Godzilla story. He also did a Gumby story. And you heard me right. Gumby.
I have that.
Oh, do you? Okay.
I'm an Arthur Adams fan too. So
yeah, I mean, wow, Arthur Adams is amazing. So you get, just seeing them draw anything, or seeing somebody even if they're a writer or something, seeing their unique take on some weird thing is also interesting. Even if it doesn't sell that well, that probably also indicates the passion of that creator to go do this thing that's so obscure. Like, why would they think to do that when they were known for something much more mainstream. So I really dig that kind of stuff. And back before the internet, I think it was even more thrilling if you were leafing through some old, like the quarter bins at the local comic store or something, and you're like, whoa, this is Arthur Adams. And then you start flipping through it. You're like, when did he draw this? It's like this, you found like this nugget of gold or something.
Before we start talking Captain Adam, I have a couple listener questions and comments that I'd like to share with you and just get your thoughts on. And this one's from Isaiah Harrison. Isaiah said that, how would you compare your process between a more cosmic character such as Captain Adam versus something more traditional like Green Arrow? What was the shift like for you between those two characters?
It was a pretty jarring one because there was 2 months in a row that I was drawing an issue of both. When I drew the last issue of Captain Adam, or the last 2 issues, so it'd be issue 12 and issue 0, then issue 0 and issue 13 of Green Arrow, I did those overlapping, if that makes sense. So it was kind of a weird transition. Basically, Captain Adam, because he's an energy body and could float around anywhere and stuff, that character could be in any pose, or he was actually easier to draw. Like in talking scenes, I could have his head coming from anywhere in the panel because he could be floating upside down. I never did that, but I'm saying theoretically I could do that. He didn't have to be really grounded. So compositionally, I could do anything I wanted to. That's funny. I said I didn't draw them upside down, but there's actually a whole thing in the time stream where they were upside down. So never mind, I did that. Anyway,
did you wait? When you did that though, did you draw them right side up or upside down? How did that work out for you on your end?
He was always. Anytime I was rendering them, anytime I was drawing them, they were always right side up to me. In Photoshop, you can rotate the canvas on the fly, and also, once it's on paper, of course, you can flip it all around. But if you've ever tried to draw something upside down, and then when you look at it right side up, it looks all kinds of messed up because, we're used to seeing it a certain way. So thinking of something more realistically for Green Arrow was a big jarring transition, but it's not a completely unfamiliar one. I think it was more dramatic to go from when I was doing JSA All-Stars, although there was Citizen Steel and Hourman and above all Power Girl, who were very powerful entities. It was a much more grounded as far as people standing on the ground talking, if they were talking, or the action was like one person punching another one. It wasn't as ethereal or strange in some ways as Captain Adam was. So, but as far as how you wrap your brain around it, it's kind of a nebulous concept, but I always think back, I was in drama whenever I was in high school, and you try to put your mind into their mind, so you're trying to act through them, or if you've ever played a role-playing game, you try to be in character, so you think of the emotional state that they're in, and then what that would reflect, how they physically look, how their posture is, and all this stuff. But yeah, it's a big difference for sure.
I play a lot of PC role-playing games, and because I like the character development, I like the sense of accomplishment, and I like the story, obviously to be pulled into the world and the environment and all that. But one of the things I find is if I shift from like an MMO to like a regular, like to Skyrim or something like that, I will find that the controls, because they're different, I'm like doing things for one from the other because of the shift. And there's a point to this question. Coming back to what you're saying there, when you were doing Captain Adam and Green Arrow at the same time, you were with that kind of overlap. Did you run into moments where you had to like stop yourself from doing Green Arrow style on Captain Adam or Captain Adam style on Green Arrow because you were because I would assume your pages were overlapping too, where you were doing like a little bit of Captain Adam, then a little bit of Green Arrow. Am I right on this?
Yes. Yeah. And it's even the same thing now that I'm working, like because I'm still doing work for DC, but I'm also doing some work for Dark Horse and IDW and stuff. So the content of the characters and the styles, now trying to be clever and having those overlapping and differing styles is even more challenging, because you have to get your mind back into the correct mental space or something. Where I think it shows the most is in camera angles and in body sizes. So, because Captain Adam had a much bigger... He wasn't huge, but he was much beefier as far as his physique was much bigger than Green Arrow. So, and especially Green Arrow in issue 0. In issue 0, he was like, supposed to be 5 or 10 or however many years younger than the current incarnation of Green Arrow. So he was even thinner. So it was just a lot of trying to be conscious of that and keeping myself in check. And since I'm working digital, it's a big advantage too, because I could go back through and tweak proportions before I released a page or before I went on to the next step of the page. You know, when I was done with my roughs, before I went and did all the structure drawings for everything, I could kind of tweak things. And then when I'd go from structure to pencils, I did digital pencils on Green Arrow, I could go back through and make sure tweak his head be bigger, make sure the joints of his elbows and his knees were a little bit more knobby so that there was less flesh around them and all that kind of stuff.
How did you manage time there? Because, you know, when I was looking at the Green Arrow Zero and then I'm looking at Captain Atom Zero, there's a lot going on in both issues. In Green Arrow, you've got a lot of different locations. You've got a lot of action going on. In Captain Atom, you've got, especially, you know, in the issue Zero, you've got like a lot of really cosmic introduction to how this character's developed in there. How did you as a creator, because it's hard to pump out a single issue in that time span. How did you manage to pull off that 4 issues overlapping thing that you were doing during that time? Because I'm incredibly impressed that you pulled it off, and they look great.
Thanks. It's a lot less sleep, and I don't I drink coffee kind of casually. You know, I don't drink it every day. I probably drink it even when it's cold. Like right now, it's really cold in Missouri, but I probably drink coffee once a week, if that, under normal circumstances. So I up my coffee intake. I stand up a lot longer whenever I'm working because I have a desk that has a motor. It's motorized, so it can go up or down.
Cool.
And when you're standing, although it does burn more calories, so in a way, it sounds kind of counterintuitive that would keep you awake. But if you're sitting, you're more comfortable. It's easier for you to kind of lose your momentum or something and start slowing down. So if you're standing, or if you're going between the two, that's probably the more important thing, that you're standing for a while, for maybe an hour or so, and then you sit down. But that's kind of like the mechanics of it, is that you just you find something interesting to listen to in the background. And for me, it was, I'm trying to think if this was during that time. No, it wasn't. It was issue 16 of Green Arrow was a brutal deadline. It happened right after Hurricane Sandy. And so Annie Nascenti, who was the writer, and then my editors and stuff, they were all like kind of put out of their rhythms and their offices and everything. So I had like right at 3 weeks to do all of Green Arrow 16. And I was doing pencils and inks on that issue, and it's a much more detailed rendering style and all this stuff. So that was such a crazy deadline. But on that, I kept my mind occupied by I found the website called southparkstudios.com, and it's been around for apparently a couple of years. I just didn't know it. You can watch every episode of South Park on there for free. I mean, it's their website. It's the South Park Studios website.
Right.
And there's still commercials and stuff, but the commercials there's not as many of them. And I mean, so there's like 15 or 16 seasons of South Park, and I love South Park. So when I saw that, I was out of my mind with excitement. Like, I can't believe it. It almost felt like I was going to get to hang out with these friends. You know, this is the group of friends I was going to get to hang out with and look at all the stuff we can share, all the adventures we can share. So, so anyway, that's basically it. You just sleep very, very little, and then when you're awake, you have an awesome wife who goes to get you your food, and you eat at your workstation, and she takes care of everything else, and then you just draw for, with no exaggeration, 18 to 20 hours a day. I mean, in a row. You know, you just draw. And if your hand hurts you because you're holding things too tight or whatever, then you find the next piece to work on, and you just start. And also, Kiki would help me with my wife, Kiki. I know you guys know who she is, but not all the listeners do. She would also help me fill in blacks and that sort of thing. You know, so like on a page, if it was, I would X out a bunch of areas indicating this area needs to be filled in with India ink, and then she would do that. That's a pretty easy thing to do, and you have all these pages. You know, your hand is tired from doing all this detail work, so you put that page aside, you pick up 2 or 3 pages and start plotting out some of your bigger black areas, and you X all those out and then throw them over to Kiki, and she's like, ugh. And she always says, all these bricks, like there's all the, you know, all this stuff to fit, all this meticulous sort of stuff. So anyway, that's how you get through those really long hours. You try to keep brain occupied, you vary how you sit and stand and draw and all this, and then you have an awesome wife who helps.
And actually, one of the things I like as a fan, I'm your audience. I'm the guy who every month picks up the serialized story. You're drawing me into your world, and I don't really, because you're doing the great job that you are, when I'm reading your stories, I'm not thinking of those things because I'm being pulled into the place that you've taken me. But one of the things I love about doing this podcast and putting this out to people is these are things as fans that I think we need to appreciate what it takes to put into, in that very short span, because you don't have a lot of time between issues to be able to get out the next issue, to get that material together and to keep bringing us the content that we're looking for every month, because it's a serialized medium where you're crafting an ongoing story and taking us to places that get us past our daily. Your South Park analogy is funny because your work a lot of times is my South Park. That's what gets me sometimes in between doing something. The motivation I take is I'll pull out a favorite comic book and start. Yours are definitely in that category. And I'll start looking back through. And I've been recently going back through some of my favorite comics over my lifetime right up to present day and just grabbing favorite runs and reading through those. And sometimes I need those in between, like grading papers or making lesson plans for the next day on the teacher end of things, with what I do. It's your work that does that. So thank you for the amount of dedication you put into your craft, because it's a lot of times us as the audience don't get an inside view to that, because you do a service for us with your art form.
Oh, thanks. I am very happy that it comes off that way. When I was younger, I had no idea how many long hours it would be. Now, that being said, I was answering some emails earlier today. Somebody was asking me about kind of what life is like as a penciler. That's not exactly what they were asking, but they were asking a wide variety of stuff. That's kind of what it boiled down to. And I was making it clear that because I wanted to draw comics, there was nothing that was going to stop me from that. When I was younger, I had no idea how much money comic book artists would or would not make. I had no idea really how long. I knew that it took about a day to do a page was what I remember hearing. That there was a lot of the real world aspects of it that I didn't know about, but nothing could have really stopped me from wanting to draw comics. And most of my friendships have suffered. I don't see my friends nearly as much. I'm lucky that my wife and I hang out all the time because she's like my assistant. Is her full-time job right now. So that is good. There's no problem there at least. But you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of the realism, the reality, the situation that was not clear to me. And I know that it's not like that for everyone. Not every artist or creator is so tied to the deadlines. Like sometimes if creators approach with that sort of a deadline, they'll just say, I can't do it. No, it's going to take me an extra week to do that. And there have been times that I've asked for extra time. I guess the point that I'm trying to make is it's great to hear that the entertainment factor of this hard work is enjoyable, and I hadn't really thought of it. I was looking at it, South Park or these other creative things, not really thinking that mine would be my creative thing, would kind of strike someone else that way. I guess it makes sense, but I hadn't really thought of it like that.
Oh, it's why we do this. I mean, it really comes from that love. So I was connecting with your South Park thing in a way you probably didn't think it was going to go. And it really is, for me, that's what comics are to me. It's my pick-me-up. It's my thing that gets me going. It's, with that bad day at work when I come home and I need something to just get me motivated to do the things that I need to do for the next day. Well, your work does that. I mean, so it's really great to hear you grabbing somebody else's work to get you motivated to put out this work that motivates me. It's kind of, we've got like this cyclical thing going on, which is kind of cool. It's kind of cool.
That is cool. Yeah.
And I gotta say, with hearing you talk about how you were rushed and how you had a very tight deadline on 16, just the detail that is in this book, knowing that, I've always been impressed with your work, and I've always enjoyed it. And I'm sitting here just hearing you say that as you're saying. I'm just flipping through and just looking at some of the fine details, not only of just the main characters, but just the background stuff that you put into this. Dude, I am even more impressed than normal. I'm like, wow.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm happy that it came out well. There was a lot of stress on me to get that one going on. It was, like I said, it was around the time of the hurricane and stuff. So I had everybody was in a unique position. I didn't know kind of what the etiquette was, like as far as trying to pester them to get the next script or whatever, fill in the blank. So, because I was basically waiting just for script. Now, Annie where she normally lives was flooded and she was displaced. So this is not a negative towards her. It was just everybody was dramatically thrown out of their routine and stuff. So, but yeah, there was a lot of stress to get that to work. And I had an inker on basically every other part of Green Arrow. There was a few pages that I inked here and there when deadline called for it or something. I had wanted to see what it would be like to ink in that style, the more feathering and cross-hatching and all this other stuff, because normally my art is very, very clean, or it's the gray wash stuff. So to ink like that was, I don't know, it was just trying a lot of stuff in a very short period of time.
That was one of the questions I was going to ask you. Is it hard when you're used to having an inker on a book like Green Arrow, because that was the method you were working on in this? And I knew that 15, I saw that you had done certain pages in it where you'd done the ink work, because they tell you in the beginning who's done the ink work and all that, and I noticed that. But then when I saw 16, you did the whole thing. That shift to all of a sudden saying, whoa, I was counting on an inker doing this, and now I'm doing the ink work. Is it hard to make that shift when that's something you're normally used to on that book?
Yeah, it was, not just from the time constraints, but it was also Rob Hunter, who was my inker for the most part for the rest of the series. He's a much better inker than I am, and he's very meticulous in how he crafts his lines. He's very good. Thank you, Kiki. She just brought me a drink. And he's inspired by Scott Williams, who I think is the best inker probably ever. Most diverse and multiple styles and all this stuff. He's an amazing inker, Scott Williams is. And Rob Hunter is kind of from that same school of inking. So I found myself thinking, what would Scott Williams and what would Rob Hunter do in this situation? There's a way that you can imply things. If you look at a lot of commissioned sketches that artists like Jim Lee do at conventions, there's a really fast, rough, raw sort of feel to it, and there's a time and place for that in comics. Usually in battle scenes, you're cool kind of having that more raw feel. But for the most part, you want to have your lines really well honed, well crafted, so that they don't look rushed. But stuff like motion lines, even, if you look at how Rob Hunter does them, I'm assuming he's using like a French curve template, and he's using a Hunt's mapping point, which is like a dip pin or perhaps a brush or something, and he's slowly crafting those lines, and they look amazing. And then whenever you're trying to do that yourself, you do like 2 or 3 of those lines, and you're like, holy crap, like that is a lot of work to craft it in that way. Then now that you've already done a couple pages like that, do you then get lazy or start taking shortcuts? Do you know what I mean? Like, how long can you kind of your stamina? How long can you keep that style up? A good example of where something like that happened was in Wildcats X-Men crossover, the one that Travis Charest drew, and I think that was like the silver or the gold, I can't remember, but it was like takes place in the World War II time period, and the first like 5 or 6 pages are all he inks the whole, he pencils and inks himself, and the first 5 or 6 pages he is using like a repeatograph or something, and he's doing lots of really meticulous cross-hatching to create gray values. And then about page 5 or 6 or 7 he starts transitioning where he starts using gray wash and India ink cross-hatching to get his desired result. And then by like page 10 or 12 he's doing almost all just India ink washes, and there's hardly any of that thin little line rendering, and the pages are beautiful, but it's a weird style transition. And Wildstorm Effects did what they could to kind of bridge the transition using color. They tried to kind of create fake gray washes in the beginning of the book to try to ease you into it, but if you pay attention you can see it. In general, that's a no-no. You don't want to change gears, so to speak, halfway through a book or 5 pages into a book. It's intimidating, especially once I realized just how much I've been paying a lot more attention to just how patient and meticulous you have to be to really craft that line work the way that Scott Williams and Rob Hunter and Art Thiebaud, especially in some of his older work, how they have to craft that stuff. It's not just as simple as finding the right tool that gives you the right line every time. That's part of it, but then you have to really structure it and be steady and all this stuff. It's a whole art form. That's what I'm trying to say. It's a whole art form unto itself. Of course, there's been inkers since the beginning of comics and stuff, but I have to be real honest that when I was first starting out, I just didn't value inkers as much as I currently do. That's not to say I disrespected them, but I just assumed that it was like, well, they're basically augmenting the penciler. And there is some truth to that with some inkers, but wow, not all of them. The really good ones really do add a tremendous amount to the pages. And you get a better most of the time, if not just different, you get an amalgam of styles at the end of it. To look at Jim Lee's commission work, it's very raw, but it's still Jim Lee. You can tell it's Jim Lee. But then if you look when Scott Williams inks his stuff, it's this whole other... It escalates it, it elevates it, to a whole nother level.
I enjoy it, and you do this a lot, where you'll post the different phases of production of the finished product. We get to see like the different stages of the whole thing, and we'll see that sometimes with Jim Lee's work. There'll be postings of his original pencils, and then the inks, and then those different stages. I'm a fan of seeing that stuff because I'm not an artist. The steps that it goes through for me, I can't understand it from a fan standpoint. When you were talking about it now, and I love when you throw out references, because I can totally see why I'm a fan of your work, because you'll throw out like people who you like, people who you're interested in their work and what they're doing and that type of thing. And I'm like, yeah, I like all these people too. I no wonder why I like this guy's work so much, because I just his sensibilities are what I like in art.
Yeah, it's totally. I've been getting a lot of questions recently about like via Twitter and Facebook, and before we started recording, I know we were talking about a lot of the weird questions that I get and stuff. But one of the questions that I get, that it's not that it's an easy thing to answer, it's an easy thing to sum up, but it's like, where do you get your style from? Or how do you create a style? And the best answer, the shortest answer that I can give, or the most concise answer, is whatever artist you gravitate towards that you like the most, you analyze how they draw, break them all down into technique, and you analyze that stuff. So you analyze what tools and the shapes that are used in the graphics of how they draw, muscles or trees or rubble or whatever. And then you combine all of those and then wrap them into your own artistic sensibilities. So you've kind of... I don't know, it's like they're all providing different types of spices, and then you're combining them into your own dish, and then you're adding a lot of yourself, of course. But, I'm a huge Arthur Adams fan, huge Jim Lee fan. There's a long list of guys that, if you guys ever come to Missouri and hang out at the studio and care to see this, because you're welcome, definitely. But if you... and we sit down and there's actually, it's not boring. I could show you, like, this is like the origin of where I got how to draw bullet holes from, or whatever it is. You can break it down even to that. And some of it's from photos, but whenever you look at another artist's work, there's a stylization that it speaks in a different way than a photo does. I think that we must have a lot of overlapping interests when it comes to artistic styles.
It's funny, you'll sometimes say that you think a story might be boring or something like that, and I'm laughing because for me as a fan, it's just the opposite, because I don't do what you do. I read and enjoy the product that you produce. It's very fun for me to know these like steps that you'll mention sometimes. You'll take something and you'll flesh it out, and I'll be like, wow, it takes all that to get this. And it if anything, it increases my enjoyment and appreciation of something I was already digging, because I know the kind of depth that goes into what takes me to a different place. So it's really neat for me. The issue 16, it's funny, I didn't know, when I'm reading the book, I wasn't registering everything that was going on behind the scenes with the disaster that was going on, and how that would affect you, all of you, who are creating this comic. Because I really liked seeing, I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. We got an issue where, Freddie's doing the ink work on it, not knowing that that was why that it was really like, wow, everybody involved in this issue had a mad scramble to try and make this happen. One of the things that I really liked reading issue 16 on my end, and it's fun with the whole run, I like when you're on a new project, and I've always enjoyed this. I talked about this back when you were on The Flash too, and Captain Atom. I like watching you get experimental and trying new things and doing new things. I know the Freddie style. There's things about your artwork that, like, I catch and latch onto about certain ways that you do things that give me comfort because I connect with the artists that I've enjoyed since I got introduced to you with your Robin run. I love, and it's seeing you, like, when you do thinking, or it's not something that you normally do, noticing something a little different about your artwork. I'm a big fan of Green Arrow right now as a concept anyway. The TV show's out. It was a book that, like, previously for me, I mentioned it on the show when the Zero issue came out, I thought it was a good book. I wasn't, like, I think it's because it took a character who I had loved for years with, I'm talking about the crazy goatee guy. He was very important to me. I've read him consistently since Longbow Hunters. Big Mike Grell fan with it. And when the Zero issue hit, for some reason, there was something about that issue and kind of seeing his backstory and getting this guy's motivation that clicked for me. And it was, for his New 52 appearance, it was the first time that happened. I've been really greatly enjoying this run because I felt like I'm connecting with the guy again in a way that I haven't been in a while. So I'm not trashing anything that came before that. I don't mean that in a bad way, but it was a good book. Not a bad book. I wasn't thinking of dropping or anything like that, but it was a good book that became a great book because I was connecting with the character finally with the Zero issue. And I love the story. Not that I love what I was going through, but I love the story of what happened with issue 16 because it makes me appreciate a lot more of what went into doing that. Because you see on the internet a lot of times a lot of crabby people who I don't really think are comic fans personally who will complain about the tiniest little nitpickiest things about comics instead of focusing on what I think they'll take the 10% when the 90% is the good, the good stuff that keeps us coming back every month. They'll take the 10% and heavily focus on that, and which I don't do as a reader. I never have. When I hear a story like this and then I look at this issue and I'm like, boy, if you had told me this before I had read this issue, I would have laughed and said, there's no way that he did this in that time. Because, there's too much going on here. That goes back to your sleepless nights, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much. But yeah, it comes from very little sleep and just working just as long as I can, having Kiki to help me and stuff. The style stuff, changing styles or doing something different from project to project, that has also made it a little difficult when, now that I'm shopping work outside of DC, it's made it difficult. I'm not known for that one certain style. Like, basically, whenever I'm showing work around, it's like I have these gray wash samples, these heavy pen and ink stuff, and then this clean line art sort of style. You know what I mean? Like I have kind of like 3 separate portfolioos that I'm building. And the benefit is if a certain publisher is leaning one way, I can show that stuff to them. But I don't have as large of a catalog of work in that specific field. So generally, I'm just trying to sell myself as a diverse artist, and hopefully that is a good thing. And so currently, like, on my plate, I did some design work and some rendering work that I'm finishing up today for the movie After Earth. Like, there's a book that they are putting out, like it's a companion to the movie, and some of the design work I did might show up in the sequel, if there is a sequel, because no one knows. But I did some design work, and then, like, this really heavy pen and ink sort of. It's not the type of rendering that you're looking at in Green Arrow 16. It's like it's more akin to woodcutting, or the stuff where you're creating really subtle, you're doing lots and lots of hatching and the thickness of the lines, and then really thin lines, so it creates like gray value in that. And it's very laborious, but it's fun, and that's the style that they were going, kind of had in mind and stuff. So doing that style for that series of illustrations, and then I did a cover for Ghostbusters, the IDW comic book, and I did that in gray wash. And I'm currently doing a cover for still IDW of G.I. Joe, and pretty sure that's going to be in like an open line sort of style, like probably some spot blacks. We'll discuss it more, and then possibly doing some Ninja Turtles work. There's like a wide variety of stuff, so it's fun to be able to work in those different styles. But there's a little bit of a drawback to it as well, even in like logistically working. Like, if I've only got a single piece that I'm doing in gray wash, I have to break out all my gray wash stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then, but if I'm doing like a whole bunch of commissions, because I've taken on a lot of commissions recently, and gray wash seems to be pretty popular in the commission community. So that hasn't been too much of a hazard. I'm almost always working on something in gray wash, but it's just that there's that weird variety that's fun, but it's also the more you diversify, the less you can specialize.
When you're doing cover work, do you run into that? Like, when you're doing different covers for different projects, does that put you in that? Because I guess not knowing the process myself, do you run into, like, if I'm doing a Ninja Turtles cover and then I switch to a G.I. Joe cover, do you run into stuff like that, or is...
Yeah, and it greatly depends on deadline. So far, the stuff that I've been doing for IDW, like, the deadlines are kind of far-reaching, meaning I have not been stressed by the deadlines. They've given me a lot of time. So that helps a lot. That goes a long way to keeping me feeling... not making me confused. Like, so in other words, I have a lot of time to adjust between, even if it's just, a few extra minutes to kind of wrap my brain around where was I last time whenever I was working on the roughs and now I'm working on the structure or something. But yeah, having a wide variety of projects like that, I run into it all the time, but it's, for the most part, as long as you're not being hurried, as long as you have more than this, 4 hours of sleep that that is required under deadline, as long as you have like a normal sort of rhythm to it, it's actually pretty fun because you're getting to play in a lot of different sandboxes. Even that same thing goes for the types of characters that I'm drawing, because like if I would love to draw some stuff for the X-Men, and it's not like I'm currently signed up to do anything for the X-Men, but I'm heavily pursuing that. I would love to find a way to do that. So if I was working for Marvel and DC and doing work for IDW and Dark Horse, like all at the same time, as long as they're not all due on the same Friday, then that would be dream come true. Just working on everything you like to do, that'd be amazing.
I'm heavily into what Marvel's doing with their X-Men material right now, and I would love to see you on something like that.
I would love that too. Hey, we're in agreement. Let's make that happen.
No, as a fan, I would love to see that, because I think it would be it would be a nice energy.
If you want, we'll place a couple phone calls. We'll make an offer they can't refuse.
Yeah, then you won't. That'll never happen. These guys were calling and they won't leave us alone.
I mean, now that I know that you guys are on the case, really, I'll just stop trying, because it's you guys are basically the heavy guns when it comes to that sort of thing. So I'll just chill out and stop emailing them, knowing confidently that it'll happen.
Wait. Sensei and the doctor want it to happen. They'll pop out.
They'll call me. They'll call me.
5 years from now, we'll hear him on another podcast going, so then I let these two dolts. What was I thinking?
Someday it would be great if I do get to do some X-Men work. It would be great, to talk about that with you guys as well. Yeah. That'd be fun.
That's one of the things that I'm looking forward to with you not having an exclusive, is the work that we're going to get to talk about, because I've really enjoyed in getting to know you, and I think this is true of our listening audience who's gotten to know you over the years too, being able to explore these different projects with you and getting to see how they've affected you as an artist. Just recently, you've been posting a lot of commission work on places like Facebook. I'm used to following you monthly because, that's usually my delivery medium. When I've seen commissions from you, usually it's been if I've been at the table watching you, which is... Mm-hmm. If anybody sees Freddie at a convention, I urge you to go stop by, talk to him for a little bit, hang out and watch him work, because it's the coolest thing in the world. But make sure you get yourself a commission, because you've done in my sketchbook twice now 2 amazing commissions. You did a Superman for me, which I think you posted on Facebook recently.
No.
Was it another one?
I know exactly the piece you're talking about, and that has been posted since like the within the month or so that I did it for you. I think I did it. Didn't I draw that like in 2008, perhaps? I mean, it was something in that time frame, right?
Yes.
Up there since that, and somebody just happened to comment on it one day, and then that triggered this long series of comments of where it seemed as if it was new or something like that. Again, I was frankly surprised at how many comments it had gotten after. I mean, it's like in the teens as far as the number of comments, but it was for a commission that I did several years ago. I was surprised by how many that it kind of lit up with all this activity.
And you did this amazing Robin for me where it was in the opening cover. And just because it ended up being in the opening cover, it extended a little bit under the other cover. It's gorgeous. It's like one of my favorite pieces I've ever gotten. It's interesting to see, like, because you've been posting lately, and you made this really funny comment. Somebody said, why don't more people draw Martian Manhunter? You came back and said, I always draw Martian Manhunter. He's just appearing as different characters. Or it was something like that. I'm paraphrasing you. But I thought it was really
you're saying it correctly. It's that basically that every time I draw a character, it's actually Martian Manhunter disguised as the character that it looks like. So even if I'm drawing it looks like I'm drawing the character Invincible. That's actually Martian Manhunter disguised as Invincible. So you get a lot of Martian Manhunter in my work. Also that. The piece that I did, the Robin piece that I did for you across the inside cover, that was, or the two pages, kind of, that started a trend for me now where it's a rule. So I'm saying this, so now I'll be maybe hammered with new sketchbooks. But if somebody brings to me, if they're getting a commission in their sketchbook and it's the first piece, so when you open it up, got the inside blank cover and then the first page, I now always leak it across both pages. So you kind of get a double page spread. Sometimes it might just be a cape that's kind of going to the next page or something, but depending on organically how it feels. But, there's been plenty of pieces where I did one where it was like a wildcat piece. And I drew like a full body so it was like they get kind of twice what they paid for or something, just because it felt like that was the right thing to do. But that now has become, in my mind, kind of a rule that if it's a brand new sketchbook, I have to draw it across both pages now to make it hopefully an impact. And it just doesn't feel right to leave that page blank. Like, it just doesn't feel right to leave that page forever blank. It needs to be used,
It's special. I mean, it's speaking of my Robin, I absolutely adore that. I loved your Superman that you did for me. And one of the reasons why I went on that tangent was getting to appreciate recently some of the posts you've been doing of commission work. And I don't know, it's funny how, like, for as long as I've known you, I don't do a lot of surfing on Facebook looking at artists' pages, and I need to do that more, especially if work's being posted, because I've really enjoyed, like, going back and following your page now and seeing things that I've missed with commission work, because I love your monthly work. But this has been a chance, like, seeing you do Invincible was geeky as can be for me, because I like your take on it. It's true of any character that you do in a monthly. It's opened up my imagination to, like, well, wouldn't it be cool if you could do this, or wouldn't it be cool if you could do that? I'm talking about in monthly format.
Thanks. And doing a wide variety of commissions or subject matter and commissions is really exciting for me too, because of those same reasons. Like, Invincible has always been, or has been for a long time, my favorite comic. And which was especially weird whenever I was doing, when I was under the exclusive with DC, and like newer readers would come up and say, what comic do you recommend? And I'd go, Invincible? It's an Image Comics. It has nothing to do with what I'm drawing or what even my company or the company I'm working for draws or is creating. But actually recently I did one of the commissions was I haven't posted this one, but it was, because there's actually quite a few that I don't post. I only post kind of the ones that for one reason or another kind of strike me that day. But there was a commission I did of where it was this weird mashup of Invisibles and Charlie Brown. And the guy who commissioned it is a guy who I've known for several years who lives in Australia, and he and I have kind of become buddies talking about weird stuff, weird tangents and stuff through email though. And he had this real specific idea, all these parallels that he drew with the characters. And so I basically aped a Charles Schultz style, which it isn't completely unfamiliar to me because I did that kind of thing at Hallmark as well, but where you have that really shaky brush style, like really thick lines and stuff, and real subtle gray values. But that was such a weird but fun sort of diverse thing, to be involved with. And Invincible was really cool. I do a lot of Wolverines and Batmans, and all that's neat too. But the walk-on roles, like getting to just try your hand at doing that weird thing is really fun.
Am I the only one that wants to see what happens when, like, Lucy pulls the football away from King Mob?
Yeah, in the picture that I drew, he's holding, instead of holding a regular gun, he's holding a super soaker. So I guess the worst that could happen in that respect, well, I don't know, not the worst that could happen, but maybe he would give her a taste of the super soaker. But anyway, and like Snoopy is a Cypherman, I guess. He's got like the gas mask and like the the full leather outfit stuff. It's interesting.
That's really cool. I'm looking at Captain Atom #0, the backstory of the character, which was really great because I loved this series immensely. And it's one of the things that keeps me coming back to comics is, I know I've mentioned the word experimental a lot on this episode, but it really is, I'm amazed as a fan with how long I've been reading. I've been reading since I was a kid. How every month there is something that just makes me go, wow, that's cool. Or, this was a series that throughout the entire run, I kept saying, wow, that's cool. I'm looking at like this sequence where we've got Nate, he's in the plane, and you see the reflection on the glass covering over the cockpit,
the canopy or the cockpit. Yeah,
and I'm looking at the look on his face and everything that's going on there. And I remember when I first read the issue, I just remember looking at that piece and just like soaking it in. Reflection work, when you're doing that as an artist, what goes into, like, do you draw the character underneath it and then put the reflection over them? How do you pull that off? Because it looks to me like I can picture him, and maybe it's me visually seeing. I can almost see his like whole nose underneath the reflection, because it feels like the way I would look at him when you see it in a car, for example. When there's a reflection on a car, if you look closely, you can kind of see the person, the whole person underneath it. If I'm making sense here, and the compliment I want to give this piece was, I think I was so drawn into watching this and looking at it, I was trying to see his whole face underneath it, because it felt to me like very real. It was, instead of it feeling like a flat page, it felt very three-dimensional. It felt very alive to me, because for an opening splash where you've got this character who's seeing this thing, I felt like I wanted to know what he was seeing because of the emotion he was delivering for me in that piece. And I thought it was something that really stood out for me that I wanted to make sure I pointed out in this conversation.
Thank you. That's a big compliment. I did struggle with creating that, in that creating the reflection and understanding that it's a reflection instead of a paint, something that's been painted onto his cockpit glass or something like that, especially in that style, the Captain Atom style. Although I did cheat and I used some thin line work, which really doesn't appear much else throughout the rest of the series, but it kind of, because instead I usually have these really chunky, thick, brushy black shadow work or whatever, or the abstraction, like the negative space creating the shape, but I couldn't really get away with it, so I just had to do what I had to do, I had to cheat it. Like I was saying, I did Captain Atom 0 and Green Arrow, I think 13 in the same month. It's all kind of a blur, but that was at the same time as I was in San Diego as well. So I was We stay with some family when we're out there. So it was after the convention, and I remember I had taken my, there's a tablet. Asus does not pay me to say this. I'm not endorsing, I'm not like trying to promote their product, but I'm just telling you because it's a good product. There's a tablet PC that you can draw directly on the screen. It's kind of like a portable all-in-one computer that's kind of like a small Cintiq. And so that's what I work on now instead of a laptop with a Wacom tablet off to the side, which is how I used to work. But I was sitting on our aunt's couch drawing that page. But I did draw the rest of his face, and I probably redrew that I know I redrew that at least 3 times, because it sometimes looked like, because the canopy glass is curved, it became even more difficult to sell, in quotes, sell that was the moon and that it was in a reflection. It was not written to be a reflection in the script. It was kind of written that it could have either been a splash page where you're looking past Nate's face at the moon, or maybe even 2 panels where you see his face looking up in astonishment or longing, and then you see what he's looking at in a second panel. But I just had the idea to do it as a reflection, so that's what I was trying to go for, and I just kept sticking to it and had no idea if it was successful or not, but it sounds like at least it was for you guys.
Well, big time successful on my end. This was a page that, just like with Sean, when you're opening up the book and looking, I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And that was just a stop and just look and enjoy it for a couple minutes before going on.
Awesome. When I'm working in gray wash, it's much easier to sell a reflection, and that is, let's see, where the reflection begins, you draw that very lightly, and so like maybe in a 10 or a 20% value as far as gray wash. 100% is all the way black, and then 10 or 20% is very light gray. So you would start the edge of the moon in 10 or 20%, and then towards the center of the reflection, where the light is technically reflecting the most, then you would kind of reverse that thinking. The image that's behind it, like the person's face, would maybe be at a 10% or maybe even disappear, and the moon would be at essentially 100% opacity or 100% reflection. And then depending on how, as you get closer to the edge of the canopy, you would then fade the moon back out into a thin white rim light, is what it's called. It's like a thin area where it goes completely to white to sell that it's a reflection, and that, that's where you're seeing the glass, and the majority of the light is being captured on that edge.
You also dealt with the helmet, which I thought was super cool.
Oh, don't remind me. No, I actually had... Yeah, I'm not looking at the page right now. I had actually kind of forgotten about about that, so I'm not sure exactly what I was thinking. I mean, I don't know the thought process exactly because it's been 6 months or whatever it's been.
No, I'm looking at it right now, and that's the reason why I'm saying it. It was one of the things that I noticed at the time, because you're dealing with multiple layers. You're dealing with the glass covering over him. You're dealing with the helmet, and as is typical with light sourcing, you're gonna see whenever you're seeing through like multiple sources like that, you're going to see like at certain angles you're gonna see full parts of the person's skin, because the light sourcing isn't reflecting off of that. So his face, the exposure of his face, and I really appreciated this. There's parts where you can see like the lower part of his face because it wouldn't be reflective of the light sourcing. But then you can see, during one part of it, you can see the helmet clearly. And then during the other part, and you see like his eye, like in the background of it, because the reflections there, it's like you're faintly seeing the eye, which I thought was cool. And then in the other portion, you're seeing the cockpit. And this tells you how much time I spent looking at this page, because I really liked it. I mean, it was very cool. So I wanted to compliment you on that. I probably spent way too much time doing that, but that's honestly, I'm not somebody that like just reads my comics through once, because I really enjoy artists and writers who put in fine details. When it's an artist, it's, the little tiny things that you do that you wonder, and you've shared it on the show multiple times. Do people notice these things? And I might notice them and process it in a way maybe that you didn't intend, but because you took the time to put in the extra details, it let me use my imagination and take it to a place which is true when you go to the art museum. These are things that you do. You see a piece, and you and I could be standing and looking at the same piece, and we're going to get two completely different things out of it because of the details that were put into it. Mm-hmm. I get the same thing with writing. It's a certain line, a certain piece of dialogue, a certain narrative that's put in there that will take me to a place that, where I'm thinking beyond what is being presented to me. And this was just one of those pages that just made me, I spent a whole bunch of time thinking, I'm like, I'm going to eventually get into reading the book, but I'm happy with this for right now. So,
that's great.
Yeah.
I'm glad.
Hold on. The love for this page isn't done yet, because there's something else I want to comment on as well. There was something I noticed, within like, the way I do my read-throughs, I got my first read-through, then I do my art read-through, and then I'll do another read-through. And it was something I caught probably on like the second read-through when I was really focused on the art. The fact that, you get with the flight helmet, it's the multiple pieces of it. You got your head, your helmet, your visor, then you got the mouthpiece that covers over, for the breathing. And I love the fact that because we're seeing the bottom portion of his face, you can see the mouthpiece has been removed, and it's sitting there in his hand. And you didn't just have the open face; you actually took the time and put the detail in there to make sure. Okay, here's where the breathing. Here's where the mouthpiece, the breathing apparatus is. And it's right there in his hand off to the side, as if he had just like pulled it off, his face. And I can kind of imagine him, just going through that difficulty breathing where he pulls it off and he's like, just like trying to catch his breath, and just little stuff like that. It was those details just popping in my head and kind of imagining him going through a mini panic attack.
The taking off the mask was, I almost left it on, but then you wouldn't see much of his face. So it was kind of out of a necessity. I mean, and the other thing is the other possibility would have been if I had cheated. I mean, that was the other option, and I didn't want to want to do the cheat where he just happened to not. The artist neglected to draw the mask on his face, and you don't know what happened to it. Especially since I had established that Pierce, which is his squad leader, whatever he would be called, is wearing a mask in a different shot you see inside of his cockpit. So it would be quite a cheat if I didn't have Nathaniel wearing it. But yeah, you're filling in the action in between the gutters, so to speak, like between. I guess you don't necessarily know when he took it off, but I'm assuming it was basically at the bottom of page 1, kind of in between the gutter, and in between the time it took you to turn the page, he's taking off the mask or something.
Yeah, that's actually how I was kind of envisioning it, especially when, Pierce is calling to him, Nate, and that's the communication piece as well. So when you're pulling off the mask, you're no longer speaking, and anything you're saying isn't coming through. So that adds to the whole lack of radio communication if he doesn't have the mask on. So these were all these things I was like piecing together in my head as I'm reading this. Nothing that's actually said and told, but it was an additional, just the story playing out in my head.
I'm like Jim in how I approach reading a lot, in the sense that, I'll do my initial read through where I'm just enjoying the piece. And a lot of the things that we're talking about here are things that you provide that have a subconscious effect. Like, I'm not aware that these are things that are taking me to a certain place, fleshing out the world. You mentioned how we don't see when he takes that off, but because that's there in my mind, that motion's happening. If that makes sense. And I think they're little tiny things, little details that you pay attention to that I might not notice every time I read a comic. It's not usually done for that purpose. You're creating an atmosphere, a mood. You're taking us someplace. It's a very cinematic approach to storytelling, and that's something that you create motion where there isn't. They're sometimes doing little things like that, which is, I think, incredibly important to what you do as an artist. It's funny how I now am doing a second and third read-through of comics that I'm really enjoying, not because of the podcast, but because I'm enjoying finding those things in those, because the first time through I can't get that, because I'm so being, you guys are giving me so much stimulus that I'm delving into that and enjoying it, and like I would an episode of my favorite television show, like a South Park. The analogy's really the connection there is comics to me are episodic, and it's like my favorite television show. And when I read them, it has that kind of production value, and it's doing that kind of thing for me. It's funny how going back through and appreciating sequences like this makes me realize, like, wow, this leads me into then very emotional pieces, like we've got Nate talking about with Pierce. We find out that his dad's death has had this huge effect on him. We're seeing this guy who's emotionally disconnected right now because of this big event that's happened in his life. And Pierce is calling him on it and saying, hey, you need to talk to somebody, because you can't be doing these things that you're doing. This incredibly cool thing that the readers have witnessed. You can't be doing these things because you're going to wind up dead. Yeah. And dun dun dun.
Yeah, and not just that, but if you're a squad leader and somebody is refusing to reply, refusing to communicate, and is also doing odd actions, you have to be very mindful of that for the safety of the rest of your squad. I like Pierce as a character. I like the way that JT wrote him, and sort of like his thinking. It kind of goes into, I know that this isn't in issue 0 so much, but with General Eileen, he's a little bit more of a cartoony version of this, but where he's not quite as fleshed out. But I like his thinking as a character. It makes sense what he's thinking. He didn't strike me. Eileen did not strike me as if he wants to be a villain and that sort of thing. Let me ask you guys something. Have you been reading? I saw on one of the covers of an issue of Firestorm that, and I'm not even sure actually, now that I've begun this sentence, I'm not even sure if the issue has come out yet, but that Captain Atom is guest starring in either as a villain or something in issue of Firestorm. Have you guys seen that, or do you know what I'm talking about?
I saw the issue cover.
Has it even come out, or is it still in solicits, like in previews and stuff?
Issue 15.
Okay, so that's like it came out last month then? Have you guys read that? I have not read it. I'm just wondering if the characterization, how much has changed in the characterization of Captain Atom?
I'm going to be honest, I'm on 14. I have not read 15 yet.
Came out, and I haven't actually had a chance to read the issue yet.
Whenever I drew Seven Soldiers Mr. Miracle, I kind of came on to the book after it had been established. I felt like I was trying to carry out what Pascal Ferry had started artistically for that, because he did the first couple of the first issue, I guess. And then, whenever I came on to Robin, I felt like I was trying to make like a new break, or, doing my own thing, but it was at the beginning of the 1 year later. So there was like a reason for me to be doing that. And I took it all the way out to the end of, essentially to the end of the series. There was a couple, like 6 issues in between that somebody else drew, I think. And then he became Red Robin and was a different character, kind of, but handled very well by Chris Yost and then Fabian Nicieza, and there's a lot of... Anyway, what the point that I'm making is, for the first time, I guess because of how involved I was with Captain Atom, whenever I read, I think, what was on the cover of that issue of Firestorm or something, I felt like, this doesn't feel like our Captain Atom. When I say ours, I mean mine and JT's. It felt like a different characterization, because I think, doesn't he... or maybe in the preview page or something, isn't he acting in a threatening manner to Firestorm, if I'm not mistaken, like, and in defense of the government or something? It's something weird like that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he's kind of working in league with him, but it's the Dr. Megala has kind of taking control over the Firestorm Matrix. So it's more of the Doc is kind of going a little bit darker, a little bit evil, and they're pulling in Captain Atom to deal with this, because we got the rogue renegade Firestorm going on there, and they need to kind of match power with power.
Okay, well then maybe that wouldn't be too far out of whack, especially if Captain Atom recognized that it could be really detrimental. The way the facts were presented to him was that it would be detrimental for the planet or something like that.
You know what, Jim? Let's do Firestorm next week.
Okay, yeah,
because we haven't done Firestorm in ages. And honestly, I haven't read the issue, so I won't lie. I have not read the issue yet, and I think it'd be a fun way to visit Firestorm again. And I think we've got a starting point on the topic from right here. To talk as fans of Captain Atom, to see how he's handled, because he's a character that I loved the development of, and I want to go beyond what you guys did with him. I want to see him more. I want to see that character used and used properly. I'm anxious to talk about that. So it's kind of a cool way to talk about how we're liking the handling of Firestorm, but then also, how do we like this guest appearance from Captain Atom and all that. So I think it's kind of a natural top. Let's build off of that.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. I'm doing a quick kind of skim through while talking about it, and obviously visually they're handling them different than how you guys did. It's different art team, different art style of this book, so there is a little bit of a difference there. And the initial looking on how they're handling, and it's interesting with like how he's colored and how he's actually drawn. He does have a little bit of a harder edge to him. He looks like he's got a harder edge to him. So I'm actually very curious now. I want to read that just to see if the artwork, because I'm not reading the words. I just basically did an art read pass through. So
yeah, okay.
So it's kind of curious.
Cool, fair enough.
Before we jump back into talking about Captain Atom, there's a Captain Atom comic from Isaiah. When he did his comment about Captain Atom, he mentioned that after reading issue 3 of Captain Atom, he'd love to see you back on a Flash book because he liked your take on the Flash. And Paul Looker commented that they were giving you just a nice compliment about your take on the Flash in your Captain Atom style. And that leads me to a question though. When you did the Flash in that issue, because I don't think we had a chance to talk about this when we had you on last time. I was a fan. I really enjoyed your Flash run. And you're dealing with a different Flash. You're dealing with the new 52 version of the Flash. How do you deal with when you're dealing with a different character and you've been on the character before, you're bringing him into a different style? You're bringing him into the Captain Atom style of what you're doing with this book. Is that hard to adjust something that you worked on previously in a different style to what you were doing with Captain Atom?
I mean, that's a very thoughtful question. I think for the most part it can be difficult, but I think for the most part I was taking cues from, we had some interaction, both JT and I had interaction with Francis Manipul, and they provided me some early art that I'm not even sure from what issue, but I was I knew that I was drawing Francis's The Flash, Francis's version of The Flash. And since he uses gray in a certain way, like how he actually uses watercolors instead of the India ink and stuff that I use, but, there's going to be some overlap there because there's gray values. That was basically where a lot of the inspiration came from. In other words, Francis made it really easy for me to do that. And then even the way that the stripes and stuff, as digital as I can work sometimes, I actually on the artboard, like Francis told me the way that he does the lightning stripes and stuff, although it's in the illustration on the board, after he scans it in to Photoshop, he then has to go through and meticulously redraw it in Photoshop to put it on a new layer so that his colorist, Brian, and co-writer can use it, can colorize it. I could have gone about it that way, but instead what I used was a thin-tipped gold paint pen on the artboard. I actually drew all his lightning with this paint pen, and then it became really easy. And I don't even necessarily recommend to do that because I don't even know how archive safe it is, to be honest. I was just experimenting and wanted to do something organic. And then to provide to our colorist, once I scanned it in, it was really easy to select because it was a unique color on the page. And then I could move that to a different layer and then give it to Jose, our colorist on Captain Atom. Yeah, it was just mainly, there was not a whole lot of overlap even in my thinking of how I used to draw the Flash. And then the only thing that I had to fight the urge was when I drew Flash the first time, it took me a couple of issues to get into the groove of how to make him Flash look like he was moving really fast. And so that would have been my instinct when drawing the Flash in issue 3 of Captain Atom. But JT had wrote, we talked about it ahead of time because we're very collaborative, as you guys know, but he wrote in the script that he wanted Captain Atom to look like he was strolling. Basically, he was moving incredibly fast, but for him, he was not moving at his fastest, so he wanted it to look like he was just walking everywhere, even though they were kind of both in that hyper time, super fast world until the end when Flash is running around trying to avoid the nuclear explosion and stuff. It was just kind of a different... it's the same... I used some of those same principles, like using lightning in a certain way, but it was mainly just made easy by Francis's input.
I was glad Isaiah and Paul were shouting that out because I really liked that issue a lot because it was a good point in Captain Atom to kind of make him feel a part of the DC Universe proper, but it was also great to see him through the Flash's eyes and to see how, I think Barry was a good character to utilize for that because Barry, I think, is one of the more reasonable characters in the DC universe, as far as, he's open-minded to things like that. But even Barry, who we know to be that way, was questioning this incredible power source. I thought that the meeting was really, really great because it was addressing concerns that I think not just that the general public would have, but also that the heroes of the world would have with this kind of entity coming on the scene. I thought it was just a really good point in the series for that to happen. Plus, it was a geek out to see, doing Flash work again. But I appreciated the fact that it felt like it belonged in the current New 52 version of it, but it also felt like it belonged in Captain Atom. Like it all felt like it had a great energy that felt like it really belonged and it was a part of the book, which, it could have been like where the Flash felt like a fish out of water in the book, and it didn't. Mm-hmm. It really felt very natural, and it was a great look, and the whole thing just really gelled together nicely. It was a special issue, and we didn't have a chance to talk about it, so I'm glad that they brought it up because it was a really good issue.
Well, thank you. It was even a treat kind of having the Flash guest star in the book because especially at that time, DC was not allowing for a lot of crossovers and stuff, so we were one of the exceptions to that. So it was generous on their part to let us.
I liked in this issue the loaf of bread explanation because I got a lot of times science stuff in comics, if you don't handle it right, it can get very dry. Mm-hmm. I like the pacing of the science and how it's used in Captain Atom because It's, even though there's a lot of cerebral stuff going on in Captain Atom, there's always this sense of wonder and this sense of mystery. And I'm harkening to things like your Twilight Zones and Outer Limits and stuff like that. I love those kind of shows. You want to keep the mystery going. You want to keep the action going. You want to keep the adventure going. And that's all here. While at the same time, you're given this geeky, cool science that is presented in a way where it feels like you're dealing with these people who are like incredibly brainy, above and beyond what we ever could be. But yet you're understanding and thinking through the world that they're crafting and the science that they're inventing along the way. And it was something that I just really, that whole loaf of bread thing, I just really enjoyed how that all played out.
Yeah, the execution of that kind of stuff is all JT, the writer JT Krull. He takes care of all that stuff. Because both of us will talk about some visual metaphors and that sort of thing, but he handled all the writing. So I agree. I think he did a good job with it, though.
When he goes into the test, I really loved how you see him. He goes from this like determination to, it's almost like a defiance, showing that he can do this and that this is right for him and the thing to do. But the look when he's climbing in there, don't worry about me. Or you can almost sit there saying, don't worry about me, Vigala, but he knows, like, there's that part of him that also knows what he's doing. I love the amount, there was a whole bunch of emotion going on with him and all that, from determination to thinking through what he's doing to this resolve to even the part where you're showing him with respect for, like his position and role as captain, which is critical to determine, that this guy is a soldier. This is something that it means something to him. And that title, because at the end of the issue, it comes back, it's very cyclical, a lot of the stuff that's being set up here. Because this is a guy who really seems very disconnected from his world. But these were sequences where we got to see, yes, that there's events that have happened in his life that have disconnected him from others. But there are certain parts of his world, certain parts of his core that he's latching onto that he will not let go. Even when he becomes disembodied and pulls himself back, these are the core qualities that are pulling him back together, those determinations. And I don't know if I'm explaining it right, but there's an emotion that happened there that was really critical for me to understand how this guy could reconstitute himself.
Yeah, and actually, in the initial pitch that JT had for this whole issue, it was going to be a framing device where you would see throughout the issue, it'd be like, so there's one event which took place over time where Captain Atom reconstituted himself, and it would be intercut with how he got dissolved or whatever in the first place, and that would be whenever he was reassembling or reconstituting himself, it was a combination of, like, he's basically a free roaming vapor, to use a Ghostbusters term, but he's kind of like in the complex or the military base, and he's in his own room, and like enough molecules or enough energy would coalesce so that he could look at a photo of his father. And that's how what I mean by that, or what JT would have meant by that, is enough energy would have coalesced to create a pair of eyes to look at the photo, and then a hand would be created so he could pick it up or something like that. And then so he was not consciously trying to reassemble himself. It was more just by his will to, it was like he wanted to look at something, and so he needed eyes or whatever. And I thought that was an interesting take with it, but I think it would have made it probably would have not given us much room to do a lot of other stuff. There was some legit reasons why we did not do that, but I thought it was an interesting visual to try to use. So it was a little bit different than how it appeared in the book, though.
I think that's cool.
Yeah.
As you were describing that story, and I'm looking how he actually did, I could see things like that being his motivation. If it in a different set of, like in an alternate universe where it's the same circumstances presenting itself just a little differently, in a world that has a multiverse. I could see that happening, because it's very natural with the character.
Yeah, and it would be cool even if we applied it to a different character somewhere else. It's just I think it's a cool idea, a visual way of showing the motivation.
I liked his reaction to finding out that he lost a month. And it wasn't just that he lost a month. It's on top of that. I don't think he's, like, ready, and I don't know if I'm reading this right. For me, it felt like here's this guy who's starting to see clues of what's really happened to him beyond just losing a month, and it's overload. And that screaming in that moment where he starts taking off and you just see the emotion, like, leaking. Wow. It's almost like he's denying himself the opportunity to process what's going on with him, because I wouldn't want to know that either at that moment. I really loved in this series in general the use of emotion, because I think he's a character. There's a danger when you do a character godlike like this, that there's a disconnect where they're too godlike and you can't, as a reader, relate to them. That's the opposite of what I felt with this guy. I felt like I could see how hard it would be to go from a person like me to being something like that, and how that would change your whole world viewpoint, the way you interact with others, how it would affect you emotionally. And that was, I thought, one of the strengths of the series, was that emotional connection to a character that I think sometimes a mistake is made when you don't have that. And that didn't happen in Captain Atom. I thought it was really, really critically important that you guys handled that the way, and it was one of the reasons why I love this series so much.
Thanks. Yeah, that's the big struggle, is to try to make him identifiable when his viewpoint and his motivations are so far removed from the life and the mindset and all that other stuff of the reader or a regular person. It's a completely different set of motivations, and it only becomes... If it becomes too abstract, it becomes interesting to a smaller and smaller cross-section of people. Less people can identify and find interest in it.
This is sometimes when characters become godlike, they become stoic. I thought the use of emotion in this did the opposite. It really connected me to him, not in the sense that I feel like I'm godlike. It's more of I see how hard that would be. That was something that I really liked in this series. Like, I was saying to myself, wow, you think godlike power would be something you'd want. Like, you'd want to have this, like to be able to be omnipotent and do all these things. But through the series was journey over like how tragic that is for him, and how you need to have a special strength of character to be able to stay connected with the world, because it would be very easy to disconnect completely. And to be a positive force in the world, it's this whole issue is just reconnecting me. Looking at it again with what I love so much. I can't recommend for anybody listening to this, if you haven't read this, get the trades and pick this baby up, because it's really cool.
Yeah, there's also a little bit of a behind the scenes work, not a ton, but there's a little bit of behind the scenes work in Captain Atom, the trade, and I think only one trade has come out so far. Am I correct, or is it has the second one come out? I think it's been solicited, but I'm not sure if it came out or not.
I've rebought this already, but I bought it all digitally for my iPad.
There's a single thing that I fixed. Like, I know that we've talked about whenever I had remastered some artwork for JSA All-Stars, when I'd gone back through, especially on the first 3 issues, and remastered some of the backgrounds, and also how I was drawing Power Girl and stuff, because I wasn't real familiar with how to draw a woman of that build, the more Wonder Woman-like build. And I did not have to do that much with Captain Atom, not because it was perfect or anything, but just that I was more used to drawing a character of that size. But there was something that I had drawn. It had worked better compositionally when I was drawing I think it was issue 2. Megala is thinking back to, like, the readers getting their first experience with what happened in the experiment that is explored in issue 0. There's a scene where we see Nathaniel saluting Megala and some other officials. And I had drawn Nathaniel saluting with the wrong hand, because I'm not a military guy. My father was in the military, but I did not know him. Apparently, you are only supposed to salute with your right hand, and I drew him saluting with his left hand in the original comic book. So somebody on Facebook had pointed that out to me right after issue 2 came out, and I was like, oh, wish I had known that. I would have done it right. So, of course, before I made a note of it, though, and right before the trade had to go to press, I asked them if I could patch the artwork, and they said sure. So I redrew it and recolored it in Jose's same color scheme, and we fixed it. So, but there's also some behind-the-scenes stuff, like showing a fully layered version of a file that I was drawing whenever Captain Atom issue 2, where Captain Atom is starting to see all the electronic signal, all the Wi-Fi signals and stuff. I think we show a a version of that page where I've taken out all of the knockout layers. So you actually see all the layers stacked on top of each other. So you can see through all of that stuff. So you can see through all of the crazy amount of layers that I had used to construct one of those pages. I thought that might be interesting to some people. And then some of my original character designs for him, not much different, except for that he had a red dot in the center of his head from the beginning. That's what I wanted. But so anyway, there's some other incentives to pick up the trade other than just, I think that Captain Atom reads better as a trade. Just that sort of story, it's better in a bigger chunk, so you're not trying to pick it up all monthly.
Volume 1, Evolution, is out. Our show sponsor, InStockTrades.com, has it at 45% off. They're doing that sale this month that I announced on the last episode. It's $14.99 regularly, 45% off, $8.24. To pick up 6 issues of the comic, I mean, that's a great price.
Yeah, that's a good deal.
And I agree with you. Reading this multiple issues would be fantastic, but I don't see Volume 2. It's funny, I've been rebuying some of my favorite series through the app for the iPad, because I really like the ability to be able to download them and reread them. When I run out of space, I just delete them, and then I can re-download them, instantly through Wi-Fi. So you don't have to keep your library on the device. Your library's in the cloud, and you can pull them down anytime you want to. And I really like that delivery method for travel and stuff like that, to have my favorite books. And Captain Atom is one of those I've rebought.
Well, thank you. And doesn't that always, anytime looking at a digital comic, doesn't that make you think of Big, the movie Big?
Yes.
Yeah. It's unavoidable to me. It makes me think of that every time.
I have a question. Darren Goodhart, he says, not so much a question, but I sure would like to pass on my appreciation, not just for Freddie's terrific artwork, but for what he did in putting together his book about drawing comics digitally. And that's the DC Comics Guide to Digitally Drawing Comics. I want to make sure I got the title right, because I have it right behind me. But he said, I bought this book the moment it was available, and have just found it to be a highly invaluable resource. Freddie's an absolute natural when it comes to sharing what he knows, and he deserves huge kudos for that terrific book. I guess this does lead me to a question, though. On another podcast, recently it was brought up that they just didn't think it was possible to put any soul into the work by working digitally. Now, as an artist who works digitally my own self, I certainly know that's not the case at all, and I'm sure Freddie feels the same way. What he was curious about, though, is if Freddie had actually encountered that attitude out there. And he said, just he wanted to throw it again, my kudos and thanks for the terrific work that Freddie's provided.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad that the book is helping. I have encountered that attitude. I've actually shared that attitude at times with other artists who work digitally and don't know how to cover their tracks, so to speak. That's the best analogy or the best saying that I can think of. An example is if you're watching the movie called Titan AE. Have you ever seen that? Okay. That was at a time when having 3D models was a pretty big deal, to have that in your cell animated cartoon, so to speak, animated movie. And I'm assuming that a lot of that, even the cell animation stuff, was done digital, but it was done in a cell animated look, like the figures. And then the backgrounds had these very visually jarring, different style than the cell animated stuff. I'm using that as an analogy. If anyone has seen that movie and didn't know why things looked weird or why it was kind of off-putting, I think that was the reason for it, because it was just too slick in part of it. There's the risk of that in computer-generated or computer-aided graphics, that it can become too slick looking. And whenever I said earlier, covering your tracks, it's more akin to, if you look at Futurama, the cartoon Futurama that has cell-drawn figures, but when they're on the Planet Express ship, that spaceship, or if they're standing in front of it or something, that spaceship is a 3D model, but the way that it is rendered is as if it has a line drawing with cell shading, cell sort of animation quality to it. Now, there are times that when they show a medium close-up of the ship, that so many details are too perfect, they're too round, they're unblemished, they don't look hand-drawn. But for the most part, it sells it pretty well. The figures and the backgrounds work. They feel like they're married and like they're in the same universe. But then there's other times it doesn't quite work out, but it does it more successfully. Well, with working digitally and for graphics with comics or any other sort of illustration work, if you were to just use a gradient fill on something, it looks too smooth. But if you know how to dirty it up, in quotes, dirty it up, or make it more hand-tuned, or your line art make it look a little more hand-tuned, then it starts to take away that soulless look and starts to add more humanity. and the humanity is probably the soul that so-and-so, when I say so-and-so, whoever it is that didn't feel like there was soul in digital artwork. You have to dirty it up and stuff, and I feel the same way whenever I can spot a digital artist, a bad digital artist from a mile away, just because it looks too slick, or the figures look like they've been traced. Working digitally can add a new set of problems to somebody who doesn't really know what they're doing. It can also create additional problems for somebody who does know how to draw traditional, and now that they've got this new digital tool, they're not sure exactly how to do it, so they're bringing good skill set to the table, but then they're kind of making it worse, making the artwork worse because they don't know the digital stuff as well. The point that I'm making, though, is I think that there are pieces of artwork that I've drawn or that other digital or hybrid artists have created that do have personality, do have soul, do have the hand-tuned look to it, and even the toughest critic would have a hard time distinguishing if it was computer or not. And at that point, you're successful. You're not necessarily trying to trick anyone, but you're just trying to give genre-appropriate artwork. That's what you're trying to use. I'm not sure what book it was, but it was like the first digitally created graphic novel, or one of the first. It was a Batman book that had
Digital Justice.
It's been a long time since I looked at that, but there was a novelty to seeing that being digital, but there was an awkwardness whenever trying to pick it apart. It was easy to pick apart. It was like a fledgling art form. I can recognize a ton of work went into that, especially with the technology of the time and the limitations, like slow processors and smaller hard drives, and then trying to even reproduce it and all this. It wears all of its techniques on its sleeve. You can tell it looks really digital. It also kind of works for the story, of course, too, but you know what I'm saying. It's just that it doesn't feel sophisticated in the same technique department. In the technology department, it's sophisticated. I think it is possible to marry, or if you train your eye of what to do and what not to do, it's better to err on this side than on the ultra clean, completely perfect side.
I think it's a bizarre overgeneralization saying that, and I don't know where you heard this from, so I'm not trying to insult anybody, but when you sit there and you take an art form and you start saying I don't think it's possible to put soul in that would be like saying it's not possible to put soul into stage theater, or to put soul into pencil work, or to put soul into a television drama. The same arguments could be made that if those aren't done right, or if they're done by people who are just learning, you're going to get a different output and a different product. Let's use plays as an example. There's a difference from a children's play, where kids are just getting their first experience. It's endearing, it's cute. I love seeing them. I'm a teacher. I love seeing them. But it's not the same thing as when you go to see a full-blown produced drama put together by an established director with actors who have years of history. And, there's understudies and all that kind of stuff. There's going to be an emotion that's delivered in that delivery that's not coming from the fact that the actors are endearing because they're cute and they're young. It's because of the fact that they're taking you there. So I think the digital medium for drawing and the pencil medium, we're just using pencil work, and if I'm throwing out the wrong terms, this is a comic fan presenting it that way. I think that same argument can be presented to any art form medium, and it's very subjective to the viewer on what they get out of it.
Yeah, that's a great comparison.
And I would say if you want to see soul in artwork, you look at within this issue with the doctor, just his reaction after Nathan was destroyed and after he disappeared, and they're refurbishing, they're going over the machine, and you have that really cool center panel where it's multiple smaller panels that show them working on it, and the outside of it is his face, and you can kind of see the eyes. You can see you really do get some soul in this. You get the emotion, and you see this, this raw energy, from this person who's just sitting and waiting. He knows something's going to happen. He knows it's not completely over yet, and it's just he's buying his time. And this was another one of those panels that second, third read through where you really start looking at it and you really start getting into it. You're like, oh, this is some cool stuff.
He has no compassion for Nathaniel in that moment. he's totally become this like experiment that's gone right
Yeah.
in his eyes, like, and he wants to dissect and find out every little bits and piece of it. And I mean, that's something that you get from an experience that takes you to a place. Your example's a good one, Jim, because I agree with you on that whole sequence. Because when he's sitting there, as it zooms closer and closer into his eyes, you know there's a whole bunch of crazy stuff going on behind those eyes. Like, I don't want to be anywhere. Like, I feel dirty looking at him, but I don't want to be anywhere near the inside of that head.
That was a difficult page to, just on a mechanical level, it was a difficult page to kind of lay out. And I think it was only laid out, JT did not often give me full panel descriptions because we were very collaborative. Though that being said, issue 0 was much more his story than mine because it basically was kind of fully formed in his head, and I was like, that sounds great, let's do that. As opposed to going back and forth and talking about motivation and stuff, he had and we both knew the character at that point quite a bit. So, but in any case, on that page, I think he described it as 2 to 3 panels of just showing the passage of time, or maybe he said 3 to 4 or something, I can't remember. The weird split in the middle, because you're not sure when looking at that, and this could possibly take somebody out of the storytelling, I don't know. To me, it was just a fun experiment. Is panel 1 technically a big spread, or a big splash rather, and then all the other ones are inserts? So in other words, is that big face technically is the right side of his face and the left side of his face in the same time frame? Or is it like you see part of panel 1 and that took place at the beginning of the long wait, and then you see all of those middle panels, then you see the right-hand side of the panel as being a month later or whatever it is, however long he sat there, because it's been a while since I've read it or had my head in that issue. Stuff like that is interesting to me as far as a storytelling device or a timing mechanism. That's an experimental thing. And that kind of thing also does not come up, going back to the earlier question, does not come up as much in a book like Green Arrow. This is more introspective and cerebral compared to, even if there's a lot of character development in Green Arrow, there's a lot less opportunities to do stuff like that. It's going to be more like a montage type image instead of that sort of a thing. Earlier, the Twilight Zone reference that you made is very apropos. That works very well for this because JT and I are both fans of Twilight Zone, and that is the feel. I felt like this book owed a lot to the Twilight Zone as far as how the Twilight Zone kind of shaped JT and I when we were growing up.
My exposure to JT Krull has been his recent work at DC, but I know he also does a lot of work at Aspen. And talking about it, like, he's been posting on Facebook, there's some Aspen books that are being relaunched, and I'm like, you know what, I really liked his work over at DC, so I'm going to check some of these things out because I really liked his work there. So I just want to give a shout out that check out his Facebook page and stuff, because there's like cool things going on over at Aspen. He's a writer now that I want to follow from a project like this. I felt like I connected as a reader with the creators and what the storytelling that you were trying to take me to here. It's neat when that energy happens in any project.
Awesome. Yeah, he's a good guy too.
Through the show, I've gotten more of a knowledge and appreciation for, and you even comment a little on it, Freddie, just the inking and the ink work and just the whole other layer to the art style. And I got to just tell you how much I do enjoy when you're doing your ink work. I really do appreciate that, and I like seeing how you handle the ink side of it.
Thanks. By the time we did issue 0, I'd been drawing Captain Atom for over a year at that point, but I felt like, not that I was a master of that style by any stretch, because you could work in a style for years and not be a master of it, but I felt like I had a better understanding of it, and it also reminded me of the first issue, especially of Captain Atom. It gave me probably the closest I've come to like a nervous breakdown. Like, I've never had one of those, but I imagine it's like where you're just in a lot of doubt of, am I taking the right course? Because at that point on issue 1, although I had committed a lot of energy to proving to DC or asking DC if they were cool with this new approach or this new direction and all this, and they were supportive of it, it wasn't too late for me to back out, for me to go, that's not working out. I'm just going to go about it just the regular way or whatever. By the time issue 0 came around, which sounds weird chronologically, if like somebody who's not, if one of the uninitiated, so to speak, if a new comics reader is listening to this and is like, he was working on issue 1, and then a year later was working on issue 0. That's weird, because it sounds, it is a weird thing, kind of. By the time I was doing that, issue 0, I had a much better understanding of kind of how to plan out my compositions to accommodate the use of negative space and that different art inking style and stuff, where you're using those big shadow areas and stuff. So it's hard to butt up, 2 shadow areas to each other unless you start then using abstraction and negative space or whatever. So it's a fun style to work in, and it also provides me experience later on if I do a nighttime scene or just some weird nightmarish scene or something, that you can kind of bring those same layout tools and shadow usages into that situation.
It's funny, as we're talking here, I'm also paging through Green Arrow number 0, because I'm kind of taking a look at what you were doing at the same time as you were doing all this. I'm thinking back to a conversation we had about JSA All-Stars, and I'm looking at some of the detail you put into some of these pages, like of all the stuff going on in the background. And I'm thinking of certain pages from JSA All-Stars where it's like, what are you doing to yourself? And was there a point in time where your inker and your colors were trying to kill you?
Yeah, on JSA All-Stars, I was doing my own inks, but the colorists were like, dude, what are you doing? Like, right. It's killing us. But and ironically, the same colorist team from JSA All-Stars also I was working with on Green Arrow stuff. But I had learned a lot about atmospheric perspective and simplification of backgrounds, and knowing when it's good to launch into a fully detailed background versus a less detailed one. I'm sure I still have a lot more to learn about it, but you know what I mean, where, after a year and a half or a year, however long it had been, you start to figure that stuff out. So I know that Rob, my inker on Green Arrow, was lamenting at times how long it took, but he was really on board with the level of detail. He liked it. He told me that it was taking him an entire day to ink one page, and that some artists it's not like that. It's give or take, but usually he could ink he would take a detailed page and a more simple page and be able to do those in the same day or something, and that wasn't really the case with Green Arrow. So I know that I still have to I need to pick my detail shots. Maybe I need to back off a little bit more, but when I have an impulse of how to show scale or something, and backgrounds are very important to that, I kind of feel like there are times that I have to cheat, plain and simple, but if I feel like I don't want to cheat too often. I don't want to cheat the reader. I don't want it to be where I'm just like, it's easier to draw this open background and just a close-up of a face. Now, there might be some books that would benefit from that sort of a style, to do a really simplified style, and I might employ that at some point, but that wasn't the case with Green Arrow. I felt like doing a more detailed style would fit more with that book, so that it would my idea was that it would fit more in the Justice League sort of title of books. And I know not all of that family of books are highly detailed, but it felt like it would fit more with... I knew that David Finch would be doing Justice League of America, and also Jim Lee was still working on Justice League at the time. I'm trying to think, there was something else that I'm thinking of that had a lot of rendering in it. So anyway, it just felt like the right call at the time.
And I appreciate it, because the issue 0, and I keep going back to issue 0, because 16, we talked about 16 earlier, and just the amount of detail you're putting in that in a very short time span. 0 was really critical because you were switching between a lot of locations, and you needed to, because we're taking this kid and we're taking him from being the spoiled rich kid brat and establishing for us his motivation to save others, to be more socially conscious, to be... And this was something that I felt like this book really needed at this point, because it was a good book, but I think the problem was, with it being a relaunch of the character, I didn't know his motivation. It's funny, you take a beard away from a guy and you make him a lot younger and have him operating in a way that is much more youthful. And you really need to know his motivation for doing what he does in order to get behind him 100%. The 0 issue did that, because you're taking this kid and putting him through the ringer with his friend Tommy Merlin, which was kind of like the connection, yeah. Because I like that concept on the TV show too. But I like Merlin being his nemesis, and we see this quick establishment here, though, of this is a guy who's so selfish that Is that what happened to his poor girlfriend?
Yeah.
He was watching it at the time. All these things are because he's trying to, like, one-up Dad. And I think that's something, to a certain extent, we all can relate to, that wanting to be validated, needing to be validated, he goes to a whole new extreme, and it comes from having the kind of money where he can go to that extreme. I mean, to have the assault happen on that, where he's behind a lot of this is pretty insane. And I really loved the whole story. And unless you have the details of just the sheer amount of things that are going on, and seeing him using the bow, I liked that we knew that this guy was an archer beforehand. But you're crafting it on a whole different level when you're crying on an island and then shifting gradually over many months to being this hardened guy who's been stuck there. Like he's had to live and survive and probably do some things that he never would do in a million years. He was eating things that, like, none of us would eat in order to make that happen at first to survive. You're establishing a lot in this in a very short period of time. And if you don't have the details to take us through that journey, something's going to get lost, and it didn't. And there was a lot going on in these issues. I really appreciated the amount of care that was put into this.
Good. Judd Winnick had wrote the Zero issue, even though Annie Nascenti was credited on the cover and was credited. I mean, she was the regular series writer, but I think that Judd is very good at that sort of stuff, establishing characters that you care about and, in a very short period of time. And I think from a story arc perspective, just from my own perspective, the story arc of the character and my journey is because actually, I did issue 0 and then I issue 13, 14, 15, and 16. So that's only like 5 issues for me on a series. That's pretty low. Usually I do quite a few more. I'm usually the kind of guy that keep around for at least a year on a book. But there was a long line of reasons why, kind of out of my hands that things changed. But looking at issue 0 and then issue 16, there's some parallels in action that happen as far as somebody being strapped up with a bomb is part of it.
Pike.
In issue 0, he's learning how to use a bow, and in issue 16, he's teaching the person all. In some ways, it's a very different situation, but there were some parallels connecting issue 0 to issue 16 that I'm not even sure if Annie realized when she was writing 16. I don't know if she was looking at issue 0 and trying to draw parallel themes or something, but there were some connections there that, at least for me, when reading it and working on that last issue was very fulfilling, since it was my going away issue. It felt like it had made an arc just within my own mind. So that was interesting.
I liked that it went back to a theme that you and Adam Beechand explored with Pike. How Pike was strapped up to that bomb, thinking that he had no other way out. I'm thinking back to that suicide issue that you guys did with Robin that I really enjoyed so much. But I liked Oliver's way of handling all of that. It's funny how you take a high action issue with 16 with, the amount of arrows that are flying all over the place, which I love. I mean, that's got to be a part of Green Arrow. But then you have this soft moment where he realizes if he handles this the wrong way, this is done. And what's cooler than, this kid already from earlier sequences, it's been established that this kid thinks that Green Arrow's cool. What's Ollie doing? He's distracting him by giving what every one of us would have wanted as a kid, a chance to take Green Arrow's bow and actually use it, showing that, no, you can do this. You could be this guy. I thought it was really great the way that played out. I loved the whole sequence that you did with him lining up with the arrow. I thought that was really neat. It's funny how you just have you have this soft moment in the midst of this chaos that's constantly, because they're being hunted by all of these people because of the bounty. I just thought it was really it was a neat issue in the pacing of it, and I agree with the parallels to the 0 issue, because I think it's a nice book ending. It does have that feel and vibe to it.
Yeah, book ending is actually more appropriate than saying an arc. So I like your usage better than my own.
Freddie, once again, I want to thank you for coming on the show. Most importantly, anytime we have a guest on the show, I know as a fan, one of the things I love about social media nowadays is the opportunity to follow creators, to learn what work they're doing next. You handle it so brilliantly. You've got a wonderful website, Facebook, Twitter. You're doing all these really cool things. Let's tell people where to find you and where to find out more information about what's coming up in 2013 from you.
My Twitter handle is Freddie Art, so at Freddie Art, and then I have a YouTube channel that I update off and on, and that's Freddie Art Media. And if you did a search for Freddie Williams II on Facebook, that would be easy to find me. But there's a portal to all that stuff, which is my website, which is freddieart.com, and that has links to all that stuff. I even have a link to LinkedIn, which I hardly ever use, but if you happen to be on LinkedIn, you could find me even on that. So the freddieart.com has a whole, has a link to my Twitter, which I have a ton of images that I post on there. So in other words, what I'm saying is I have posted a ton of artwork that it costs you nothing other than time to look through. I have a lot of art on my TwitPic, like hundreds of images. A lot of it has kind of a work in progress that you said that you like to look at, and I also like to look at just to see how people create stuff. So you can, if you have like an afternoon at work that you're looking, a Friday afternoon at work, it's easy to kind of spend that looking through a bunch of artwork online. And I have a couple folders on my Facebook as well, commissions and other work that I've done as well. So I often have I post a lot of stuff on Facebook. It's not like on Twitter and Facebook. It's not like I'm always posting every day, but usually at least every other day or something, I'm posting something and talking about the stuff that I'm working on. I'm posting artwork and that sort of thing. So if you're looking to keep up with the newest stuff that I'm doing, it's easy to find me if you just go to my website and then follow any of the links from that.
One of the things that I want to shout out your commission work, there's something special about when you've got a favorite creator and you go to a convention and you have the opportunity to have something personally made just for you that has that personal spin to it. It's that moment that you remember every time that you see that. And I can't encourage anybody, if you haven't done that, because it's not something I've done a lot in my life. I don't go to conventions and seek these out a lot. It's something that over the years, honestly, through podcasting, we've made friends and I've delved into this, and it's a real cool experience. And if you haven't done that, I can't encourage you enough to go ahead and take that experience. I think it's really, really cool. You can see Freddie's work. It's one thing to see the commissions and be blown away by them. It's another thing to have one that's yours. It's something that doesn't belong to anybody else. It's yours. It's that moment. It's that time when you got it. It's when you asked for it. There's something to that. So I can't encourage people enough to experience that, because it's one of the neat things of conventions and experiencing your website, because I know you do that on your website as well. It's very cool.
Currently, I'm taking commission orders through my website, freddieart.com. I'm doing that until like the end of January, first week of February, something like that. And I have a video. There are some people who I think are intimidated by they've never had a commission before, or the commission experience they had before was maybe a negative one. So I posted a YouTube video, a bit of a tutorial that describes my commission process. And it's not identical to if I'm at the convention. If you're at a convention, you're just drawing as fast as you can. And sometimes, anybody can watch me draw, but it might be where you go off to get some collectible item, and then when you come back, the commission's done and you saw nothing of it other than a blank piece of paper, and then it's completely done. But whenever I'm doing stuff online, I try to keep the person that I'm doing the commission for very involved. Like I'll send them a rough layout just so that they understand the angle that I'm going from and just the overall feel. And if they like that, then I go to a structure stage and I send that to them as well. And then I go to the final rendering. And I don't think many artists generally do that. There's no communication for months and months, and then suddenly you just have a piece of artwork completely done. I want to keep everybody in the loop to make sure that I'm giving them the best possible outcome that I can. This go-around, I started taking commissions again in November, and then I'll be stopping at the end of January, first week of February. There's been I've had a lot of commission orders, but I've had a lot more first-time commission people than I ever have before, and I think it's because there's been some positive feedback with how much I keep people in the loop. I think it's important that people feel like they have some say in what they're getting, so that they're not disappointed. Like, well, I was wanting this other type of costume of Wolverine, but he's already finished the page. I'm not going to have him redraw the whole thing, So the reason I'm bringing all that up is because it can be intimidating. Like, where do you start with a commission? And I've got that all laid out in the video on my YouTube that you can get through my website, and I'll keep you in the loop via email and stuff.
I didn't know you did that. That's really classy.
Yeah, cool.
Well, because, I'm saying from a fan standpoint, you're giving them an interaction with you that I think is very rare. And I think that adds more weight to what I was saying earlier about the experience of that being your experience getting that commission and being a part of that. I think that's really cool that you do that. And that isn't normal from my experiences with commissions. And I'm not knocking anything that I've gotten before with commissions. I like commissions a lot. But I just think there's a personal touch to that I think is unique and cool. And it's a special experience to get from you. I think that's neat. I just think it's cool.
Thanks. Yeah, and it protects everyone too, just to be sure. And I have yet to have anybody who does a crazy amount of nitpicking or anything like that. Generally speaking, that the main thing, I want them to get the sort of the type of artwork that they want, but the main thing is there's been a guy, he likes it whenever he likes the commissions where it looks like the character's kind of like busting out of their everyday outfit to show their Superman outfit or their whatever Batman outfit underneath. And it's like he wasn't being picky. It's just like there was a miscommunication basically of what he wanted versus what I had in mind. And if I had not double checked with him, he would have been unhappy. And if I would have had to change it, I would have been unhappy. So it basically keeps everybody in the loop. And it's essentially the same. I just started introducing the same experience that I normally did with editors, but I just started doing that with commissioned art as well, just to make sure everybody gets the best possible outcome.
That's fantastic.
Thanks.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
It's when I was talking about the bursting out, I'm like, and then Jim's going to ask for a series of ones where people are putting clothes on. Man, this guy wants me to put a suit on a guy with this cape and suit of armor.
That would be funny, like character, like a series of commissions where you can't really tell, or the challenge is to figure out who he is without his civilian clothes on. In other words, it would be like Tim Drake, but he would be wearing all civilian clothes, no indication that he's Robin at all, but it's just like you're catching him in those moments, or like he's wearing a bathrobe or whatever it is. It's just like the least super heroic moments,
Sipping tea.
Yeah, sipping tea. Yeah, in the first sketchbook that I ever did that's sold out now, I don't have any more copies, but I had done a series of pieces of art where it was like Batman. There was one with him mowing the grass, although he was wearing his costume, but it was like the bat mower, and there was another one where he was baking cookies, and the oven mitts he had the little talons that were coming off of it, but they were like sewed on, It's kind of like him in everyday sort of. There was one where he was taking a nap on a couch in his costume. That's a funny concept to me, is showing them in just out of context sort of stuff.
Freddie's next art book will be Vacationing Heroes by a Stream. And who is this?
Yeah, it's Superman, but you can't tell.
Yeah.
Not only is he not Clark Kent, or he's not Superman, but he's also not wearing his glasses either. He just looks like some random guy, sitting in a lawn chair.
But he's very stylish. That's great. The commission experience, I think, is I like the way you do that. That's really fantastic. And I do encourage anyone to do that because, I shared the two commissions I got from you at conventions. You are one of the most pleasant people to deal with at a convention. Friday through Sunday, or depending on what day the convention starts, I should say, run into Freddie many a Sunday. And on times where Jim and I have had a table at a convention. And you are one of the nicest, most pleasant guys on a Sunday when everybody's got a reason to be crabby on Sunday. And I appreciate that because you recognize that the people coming to the table are people who are fans. They're there to see you. For a lot of them, it's going to be their one opportunity maybe to meet you. If they aren't regular convention goers or things like that, and you give them an experience. I don't know. As a kid, I don't remember having this much accessibility to comic creators, and I really appreciate creators like you that go out of your way to be personable to fans like us, even on Sunday. And I've got to put the even on Sunday on there because I know what it's like on Sunday at a convention just from sitting at our table. And that's hard to do. And you are really one of the most pleasant people. So I encourage people to stop by your tables at conventions to consider ordering a commission from you and going through that whole experience because I think that's way cool to have that kind of interactivity.
Thanks. It comes from that crushing experience whenever you meet somebody who you were looking forward to meeting and they're having a bad day or they're just a jerk or whatever. Mm-hmm. But it was coalesced by Phil Hester. He's a really great guy, and he's given me a lot of advice over the years. And I remember, I'm not sure why we even got on this subject. Maybe we saw somebody acting rude, and then he commented to me that you should never be rude, especially to kids, because not only are you ruining their experience, you could be turning them away from comics. They could become your boss one day. I mean, there's a long list of reasons not to be rude to somebody, but above all, you don't want to ruin somebody else's experience. I think we've all met somebody who we looked up to and then it didn't go well, and you don't want to do that sort of thing. So in general, I try to be a pleasant person anyway, but even if it's been a really long weekend, I try to keep all of that previous stuff I just said in mind.
Yeah, I think I do agree that's important, because you'd never know when that's going to be. Like, you might be the only comic creator, because I didn't remember before podcasting, I didn't go to a whole lot of conventions, because there weren't a whole, like in Ohio, there aren't a ton of them, where there's a lot of conventions, but there aren't a lot, like in the Cleveland area, where you meet creators. When people travel then to meet creators at a convention, be a part of that whole experience, I think it's really great when people kind of just suck it up and take that time to be pleasant, because it's hard to do. It really is hard to do. Those are long days for you guys, and I just thought it was worth acknowledging that I've noticed over the years just how pleasant you are at conventions, and I as a fan, I appreciate that, because I think that's neat, and I know it's hard to do. I know what those long days are like, and that's tough.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
And wait, one other thing I should add onto that, he does commissions and work and things like that, too, when the convention's done. You're still drawing when the thing's all over.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in between, like, I don't often go out. A lot of the convention goers go out and kind of party in between, from one day to the next or something, and that's never been kind of my thing. So yeah, I would rather go back and work on commissions and stuff. And depending on if I'm gone I usually have to bring work with me, either on my tablet PC or some boards with me. Then I leave back at the hotel and work on. The convention ends on Sunday, and we are going back on Monday morning or something. Well, Kiki and I, because Kiki usually travels with me and helps me out at the conventions, we'll go get dinner and then just go back to the hotel, and I'll work for the rest of the night on whatever the deadline is or something. So,
is it hard to work on the road? Like, I mean, I'm talking.
It is.
Do the page. Yeah. I know your setup, just because you've described it many times on the show, and then we've had the opportunity to see it when you've shown with your camera and all that. You've got a very great workspace that you've got set up. What are some of the challenges to working on the road? One
of the big challenges was before I got the Asus tablet PC, which for anyone who's interested is the model B121. So it's a B as in boy. Before I had that, it was weird. I would take my laptop and a Bamboo tablet, little digitizing Wacom tablet, and it was hard finding an ergonomically correct way of sitting in a chair, and then your arm, is at the right angle and the right height with the Bamboo tablet. Since the Asus, things are much easier because I can sit with it on the bed in my lap, just like you would a sketchbook or something. So that's one of the was one of the challenges. Aside from that, it's just the psychological sort of not being in your workspace, so it doesn't feel like you're not in the right mindset, I guess, sometimes. I remember working at airports and stuff. I mean, it's just whatever. I'm not always working at every moment, but there are times whenever, like when we went to Australia, which on a side note, anybody who's listening to Australia, we're headed to the Melbourne show this year as well. 2012, we did the Adelaide show, and we liked it so much they invited us back, and we all had a good time. But whenever I was on the road, when Kiki and I were taking that long flight there, and had all these layovers, Captain Atom deadlines that were right on top of me, so I just worked in the plane, not the entire time, but several hours. In the airport at LAX, I was working in the corner of one of the airport, like right next to where you wait, where all the seats are and stuff. You just have to be in the right mindset. It's challenging. It can't always work, but if you've set your mind to it needs to get done by a certain day, and it's going to take me this amount of time to get it done, you just have to make it work somehow.
That amazes me, the work ethic, because you guys don't have... And I think we don't realize that. You guys don't have a lot of wiggle room when it comes to your monthly deadlines to keep these books on time. And that's an important experience for us. Thank you for the fact that you do that. It's got to be hard to take vacations.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to let not just me, but any freelance artist, to let our brains rest whenever there's a holiday or anything like that. For me, it's been a big factor. Kiki helps me to relax and keep my mind off of work whenever we go on a trip, or it's supposed to be a family trip or event or something like that. She'll say, like, you've been working however many hours, 18-hour days for the last month. We can spare this afternoon. She's right, and it also kind of it's almost like it's given me permission to not to not feel guilty or something. If it was up to Kiki, I would take a lot more of those days. It's hard to take your mind off of it because the entire time, like, we don't get paid vacation or anything, so the entire time we're not working, we're also not getting paid. So holidays, it's, the holiday season we just got out of. It's a difficult thing to fit in all that.
I love the story of you and Kiki, and it's throughout the years that we've had the opportunity to get to know you. I really love your relationship and how that works, and I think it's just really cool. And thank you for sharing that with us. And as always, thank you for sharing your time with us. You are very generous with your time for our show, as always is the case, and I'm always incredibly interested in hearing your insight into how you get all these amazing things on the page that you do. So thank you so much for sharing that with us and with our listeners. And as we'll definitely be doing this again soon. I can't wait to see what we're going to be talking about next.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you both for having me on and for being my friends. I do consider you guys friends, and it's been great getting to know you guys and being friends through the years. So thanks.
Holy caffeine!
I want to quickly shout out our show voicemail line. It's 1-440-388-4434 or drnorge on Skype. Our next episode is going to be a regular episode, and we're going to have voicemails back. We've got a lot of them that are ready to go, and I'm really excited to share them. Our next episode, we're going to be chatting about Fury of Firestorm, as we mentioned on this episode. We're also going to jump back into Batman Death of the Family. There's been some big happenings in that. We're going to be taking a look at what happened to all the Robins. We're also going to take a look at the most recent issue of Batman, and hopefully we'll continue on to things like Detective Comics and some of the other titles that have been connecting as well, just to chat about that. So it'll be really cool as a way to kind of chat about Death of the Family. With some episodes we have coming up, we're going to do another bonus show, and on our next bonus show we're going to be looking at comics outside of DC. We're also going to be doing a Green Lantern-focused episode, and we're going to be doing an episode focused on the Batman Dark Knight Returns DVDs, which will be really cool. So I can't wait to have a big discussion on those films and where they went, because we didn't talk about Part 1. We deliberately waited to kind of do a whole episode on Part 1 and Part 2. So we've got that on the slate as well. Check out RagingBullets.com. We have links to our show Twitter feed. We have a Facebook group. We're on Google+. We try to really be a part of all the social media, but I really want to shout out our Facebook group in particular. There's a lot of interactivity there. It's a great group of people, and if you haven't joined, please consider joining and participating in the discussions going on there. I just really love seeing how lively that group is, and I want to thank everyone who takes the time to participate. I really love our community. And feel free, if you have any blogs, podcasts, websites, anything, the comics that you want to promote and you're a listener in front of the show, make sure to promote them in that Facebook group. I want to make sure that we're shouting out and doing that kind of cross promotion, because I just think that's really one of the great things about the comic book community today. And we will see everyone next week.
Bye.
Flying through space and time, 1,000 different lifetimes. Faded for love and flaws and incredibly clear sightlines. Swinging your mace around, such a practical outlook. Helping the JSA and occasionally supporting your own book. Hawkman, Hawkman, eagle eyes can't see. Hawkman, your plan and what you do to me. Villains are closing in, be they Thanagard or Egyptian. Working so hard to thwart you and Hawkgirl's mission. The odds are not on your side, and danger seems to stack up. Things would be so much easier if you would just call for backup. Hawkman, Hawkman, eagle eyes can't see your plan and what you do to me. Hawkman, Hawkman, eagle eyes can't see.